87 million screens lit up with a single clip, a judge smirking, a congresswoman leaning forward, and the air thick with the sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Have you ever witnessed the precise moment arrogance collides with accountability? That was the stage set when Judge Greg Mathis, once a respected figure in the world of televised justice, crossed paths with Representative Jasmine Crockett, a freshman Democrat from Texas whose sharp tongue and sharper convictions had already made her a standout in Congress. At first, it looked like another routine exchange, the kind of banter Mathis had mastered over decades of court show entertainment. He poked, he mocked, he carried himself with the authority of someone who assumed the room would bend to his words. But Crockett was not a defendant seeking mercy, nor a guest looking for approval. She was a lawmaker with a backbone forged in the fires of public defense and community struggle. And within minutes, the imbalance shifted. The mockery that Mathis intended as harmless humor backfired spectacularly. Crockett, steady and unflinching, responded not with laughter or hesitation, but with precision. She reminded everyone listening that she was not just another politician. She was a trial lawyer, a black woman from Dallas who had defended those society tried to throw away, who had fought in courts where every word could mean freedom or prison, who had built her career on standing firm against men who underestimated her. And in that moment, Mathis underestimated her. This wasn't just personal. It was political. Crockett has carved out her reputation by refusing to let insults go unchallenged. In Congress, she has sparred with Republicans who tried to diminish her, calling out hypocrisy, defending voting rights, demanding accountability in hearings that were meant to rattle her. She has been called loud, brash, even unladylike, terms historically weaponized against women of color in power. But each time, she flipped the narrative. Each time she reminded the nation that passion is not a flaw. It is a necessity, in a system designed to silence the marginalized. So when Judge Mathis tried to reduce her to a punchline, she saw not just a personal affront, but a reflection of the larger fight, the dismissal of black women in public life, the casual arrogance of men who assume authority gives them the last word. And she chose to dismantle it, live unscripted before millions. Crockett's counterattack was not loud for the sake of volume. It was strategic. She drew on the law, on history, on the very language of justice that Mathis once claimed as his domain. She turned his own authority against him, reminding the audience that respect is not owed to a title but earned by integrity. Within 15 minutes, the energy shifted completely. What began as a mocking exchange transformed into a public unraveling of Judge Mathis's credibility. His smirk faded, his jokes fell flat, and the audience, both in the room and online, sensed the collapse. Clips spread across social media, edited and shared by accounts eager to highlight a rare reversal of roles. The judge judged, the mocker mocked, the once untouchable figure left exposed. But this story is bigger than a viral clip. It is a reflection of the shifting landscape of American politics and culture. For decades, Judge Mathis represented a kind of authority that blended entertainment with justice, packaging morality into digestible episodes that millions consumed. His word carried weight, not just as performance but as perceived truth. To see that authority cracked open by a young congresswoman is to witness a generational and cultural transition. The old guard, confronted by the new, the symbolic gavels of yesterday, challenged by the unapologetic voices of today. Crockett embodies that shift. She is part of a wave of lawmakers, especially women of color, who do not wait for permission to speak, who do not soften their tone to fit the mold, who recognize that in a political climate this polarized, blunt truth is more powerful than polished rhetoric. And while Mathis may have seen himself as delivering harmless humor, the audience recognized something deeper. A moment when a woman who has been underestimated countless times seized control of the narrative and flipped it with surgical precision. What made the exchange sting even more was the context. Crockett was already in the headlines for her battles in Congress, for her role in exposing the mechanics of gerrymandering, for standing up to committee leaders who sought to silence her. She carried into that moment the weight of those fights, and she weaponized it against a man who thought he was just playing a game. It wasn't a game. It was a reckoning. And when the clip went viral, the public reception was swift. Commentators noted how Crockett's demeanor cut through the noise, how her refusal to back down felt refreshing in an era of political doublespeak. Memes proliferated, hashtags trended, and suddenly, Judge Mathis, once the one holding the spotlight, was the subject of ridicule. His authority didn't just take a hit. His cultural capital diminished before the eyes of millions. In political storytelling, moments like these matter not because of the individuals alone, but because of what they symbolize. For Crockett, this was another reminder that she could not be boxed in. For Mathis, it was a humbling collapse of an image built over years, and for the public, it was proof that power is shifting, that voices once relegated to the margins are not just participating, but redefining the terms of engagement. Think about the irony. Mathis built his career on teaching lessons, on reducing complex human conflicts into judgments wrapped in applause. Yet here he was, on the receiving end of a lesson he never anticipated, delivered not by a defendant, but by a congresswoman armed with the sharp edge of truth. And the speed of his fall, 15 minutes, spoke volumes about how fragile authority becomes when it is built on presumption rather than respect. As the clip continued to spread, the narrative solidified. Jasmine Crockett had not just defended herself, she had dismantled a figure who once seemed untouchable. She had ended, in the public's eye, the career of a man who underestimated her. And in doing so, she reminded the nation that underestimation is a dangerous gamble when the one across from you carries both the law and lived experience in her arsenal. This was not a scripted showdown. This was real. It was raw. It was political. Storytelling unfolding in real time with the nation as witness. And it leaves us with a question. How many more Jasmines will rise, and how many more figures of presumed authority will crumble when confronted by them? The smirk that once defined him had vanished, replaced by the hollow stare of a man realizing too late that the ground beneath him had shifted. Judge Mathis had lived for decades in the safety of televised authority, where his word was final, where laughter and applause followed his every judgment. But Jasmine Crockett pulled him out of that scripted comfort zone and into a world where credentials, performance, and ego could not shield him from accountability. What the public saw in those 15 minutes was more than a clash of personalities. It was the collision of two eras. Mathis represented a time when authority figures could mock, belittle, and still retain unquestioned legitimacy. Crockett represented a future where those same tactics are met not with silence, but with fire. And the fire burned hotter than Mathis ever anticipated. Crockett did not shout for the sake of spectacle. She layered her response with precision, drawing from her experience as a trial lawyer who had defended the voiceless in courtrooms stacked against them. She reminded him, and everyone watching, that her words carried not just passion, but precedent, not just anger, but law. She reframed his mockery as evidence of a larger truth, that too often, black women in positions of power are not treated with seriousness until they force the world to listen. And when she spoke, the shift was undeniable. Within hours, the clip was circulating on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, platforms where narratives spread faster than any courtroom verdict. Hashtags praising Crockett flooded timelines. Commentators dissected every exchange, every glance, every shift in tone. Media outlets reported on the confrontation not as a minor spat, but as a cultural moment. The irony was sharp. A judge known for turning human conflict into entertainment became himself the spectacle, undone by a congresswoman who refused to play his game. But Crockett was not playing to the cameras either. She was playing to history. To understand why the moment landed with such force, you have to look at the broader context of American politics. Women of color, especially black women, have long faced the double bind of being expected to conform to norms of deference while simultaneously being told their assertiveness is threatening. It is a trap designed to silence, to control, to render invisible. Crockett's rise in Congress has been marked by her refusal to accept that bind. When colleagues dismiss her as too aggressive, she reframes aggression as urgency. When opponents call her too loud, she reminds them that democracy was never built by silence. And so when Judge Mathis attempted to reduce her to a punchline, he unknowingly walked into a battle she had been preparing for her entire career. The confrontation was also a reminder of how fragile reputations can be in the digital age. Mathis had cultivated a persona of wisdom, humor, and toughness. But in a matter of minutes, Crockett exposed the cracks in that image. Online audiences, particularly younger viewers, are less forgiving of arrogance masked as authority. They celebrated Crockett not just for winning an argument, but for embodying a larger resistance to condescension disguised as power. And as the views climbed into the millions, Mathis's cultural capital dwindled. His authority, once rooted in a television set's glow, was now being questioned by the very audience that had sustained him. Meanwhile, Crockett's star only grew brighter. She was not just a congresswoman from Texas anymore. She was a symbol of resilience, of sharp intellect, of a refusal to be dismissed. Her words in that moment were replayed as sound bites, as memes, as rallying cries. Activists quoted her. Commentators praised her poise. Constituents back home saw in her not just a representative, but a fighter who could hold her own against anyone. But what truly made the moment historic was how it tapped into a larger theme, the reckoning with authority itself. In America today, trust in institutions, courts, Congress, media, is at historic lows. Figures like Mathis once benefited from an aura of credibility that insulated them from critique. Crockett shattered that insulation. By holding him accountable publicly, she demonstrated that no title, no bench, no reputation is beyond scrutiny. And in a democracy fraying under the weight of mistrust, that mattered. Some will argue that Mathis simply miscalculated, that his humor landed poorly, that Crockett overreacted. But those arguments miss the point. The point is that in that exchange, the dynamics of power were inverted. The man who spent decades passing judgment was himself judged. The woman who was meant to be the target became the victor. And that inversion was more than poetic. It was political. It spoke to a future where the gatekeepers of old media no longer control the narrative, where authenticity and conviction carry more weight than rehearsed authority, where those who attempt to diminish others in public must be prepared for the possibility that the response will be sharper, stronger, and more lasting than they anticipated. For Crockett, this was not a one-off moment. It was consistent with her career. She has stood in congressional hearings facing down dismissive remarks from colleagues, refusing to let their interruptions silence her. She has pushed back against attempts to minimize discussions of voting rights, housing, and health care. She has walked into rooms where the expectation was submission and walked out having redefined the terms. Her clash with Mathis was simply another stage, another opponent, another chance to show the country what it means to refuse erasure. And for Mathis, it was a lesson he never expected to learn. He may continue his career, he may retain loyal viewers, but the stain of that viral moment will follow him. Because once authority is punctured in public, it can never fully be restored. Every smirk, every joke, every attempt to reclaim control will be viewed through the lens of that 15-minute collapse. That is the permanence of the digital age. What is said cannot be unsaid. What is seen cannot be unseen. In the end, what the public witnessed was not just a congresswoman silencing a judge, but a reminder of democracy's most basic truth. Power belongs to those who can defend it. And Jasmine Crockett defended hers with a force that left no doubt. She proved that authority without respect is fragile, that mockery without merit collapses under pressure, and that underestimation is the quickest path to defeat. The story does not end here. It is still unfolding in the halls of Congress, in the court of public opinion, in the broader fight for who gets to define justice in America. But for one night, in one viral clip, the roles were reversed, and the lesson was clear. Arrogance may draw a laugh, but conviction wins the moment. The silence after the storm told its own story. Judge Greg Mathis, a man who for years thrived on filling silence with certainty, had nothing left to say. His mockery, once his sharpest weapon, lay dull on the floor, while Jasmine Crockett's words lingered like an echo too powerful to ignore. What made the confrontation so devastating wasn't just Crockett's skillful rebuttal, but the way she pulled the curtain back on a truth the public already sensed. Authority without humility is hollow. For decades, Mathis's courtroom persona allowed him to sit above others, delivering verdicts with a smirk, shaping narratives in ways that left little room for dissent. But Crockett stripped that away by refusing to shrink. She reminded the audience that she too came from the courtroom, but one far less forgiving than his televised set. Real defendants, real consequences, lives on the line. She built her credibility not on performance but on survival, on fighting uphill battles where every mistake had stakes. And that contrast was impossible to ignore. Millions online saw in her composure something Mathis lacked: authenticity. She wasn't playing for applause. She was speaking from lived experience. That is why the clip resonated. It wasn't just a takedown. It was a transfer of legitimacy, from a judge of entertainment to a legislator of real power. And in today's fractured America, where cynicism toward authority runs deep, authenticity carries more weight than titles. But the implications stretched further. Crockett's exchange with Mathis became a parable of what black women in politics face every day. In hearing rooms, in press conferences, in television interviews, they are too often treated as spectacles. Their words dissected for tone rather than substance, their passion mislabeled as hostility. Mathis's mockery was a distilled version of that dismissal, and Crockett's response was a rejection not just of him, but of the culture that enabled him. She was saying what generations before her could not. We will not smile politely while being diminished. And that rejection landed because it connected with something deeper in the American psyche. Audiences are tired of watching powerful figures condescend to those beneath them. They are hungry for accountability that doesn't come wrapped in performance. Crockett gave them that in real time. The viral reaction wasn't just entertainment, it was catharsis. People shared the clip not only because it was dramatic, but because it symbolized a reversal they rarely see: the underdog seizing control without compromise. Political strategists noticed. Commentators began to place Crockett in the broader narrative of rising Democratic voices who refused to play by outdated rules of decorum. She was compared to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to Ayanna Pressley, to Ilhan Omar, women who faced intense backlash for refusing to soften their edges, but who gained influence precisely because they stayed sharp. The message was clear. The old playbook of dismissing women of color with mockery no longer works. In fact, it backfires. For Mathis, the fallout was swift. Public sympathy did not rally around him. Instead, his smirk became a meme for arrogance undone. His legacy, once firmly rooted in the authority of a television courtroom, was now overshadowed by a 15-minute collapse. It wasn't that his entire career ended in that instant. It was that his image, carefully cultivated over decades, was permanently cracked. Audiences no longer saw him as untouchable. They saw him as human, fallible, exposed. And in the world of public figures, that exposure can be fatal. For Crockett, the opposite happened. Constituents in Texas who already knew her fight saw their representative elevated to national prominence. She was no longer just a Dallas congresswoman battling redistricting maps. She was a national figure demonstrating how to confront arrogance head-on. That kind of visibility translates into influence, into fundraising, into momentum. And it revealed something else. Crockett was not just surviving in the political arena, she was thriving. Still, the confrontation carried risks. Detractors tried to spin the moment as evidence that Crockett was too combative, too eager for the spotlight. Some commentators suggested she had been disrespectful to a respected elder. But those critiques fell flat in the face of the footage. The public could see for themselves who began with mockery and who ended with poise. It was undeniable. Crockett had won, not just the exchange, but the framing of it. What lingered, though, was the question of what this moment meant for politics more broadly. Was it a one-time viral clash, destined to fade into the digital ether? Or was it a glimpse into a new era, where politicians like Crockett harness viral culture not by manufacturing moments, but by authentically standing their ground? The evidence pointed to the latter. Crockett's rise is part of a larger shift in American politics, where traditional media no longer holds sole control of narratives. A 15-minute clip can redefine reputations more than years of polished image building. And in this case, it did. The lesson for others in power was stark. Underestimating voices like Crockett's is not just unwise, it is dangerous. Because when those voices are amplified, when authenticity collides with arrogance, the result is not just a viral moment, but a cultural reckoning. The silence of Judge Mathis at the end of that exchange was more than personal embarrassment. It was symbolic. It signaled the limits of authority rooted in performance, the fragility of power that relies on image rather than substance. And it left viewers with a question that echoes beyond that viral clip. What other pillars of presumed authority are waiting to crumble when confronted by truth delivered without apology? For Jasmine Crockett, it was another battle won in a career, defined by defiance. For Judge Mathis, it was a reminder that even the most confident performers can falter when faced with someone who refuses to play their game. And for America, it was proof that the fight over who gets to define power is far from over.